Now the next step will be to actually make this delete button functional if the current user has created a given post, such that when it's selected, the pin that we've created is deleted. So we want to create a new mutation, and that involves going back to typedefs. And this mutation is going to be called delete pin. And in order to delete a pin, we don't need to provide an input to organize our arguments. Instead, we can just provide one argument, which is the ID of the pin that we want to delete, and we'll call that pin ID. So this pin ID has the type ID, and it has to be there, so we'll make this required, and it's going to return a pin. And then heading to our resolvers, we'll head down to the mutation object and add the delete pin resolver, and it'll accept root, args, and context. Now to delete a given pin according to its ID, we'll first need to find it and then delete it. Fortunately, we have a method off of pin called findOneAndDelete. So to the filter, we'll pass that we want to delete. We'll find a pin and delete it according to its ID. So to ID, we'll pass args.pinID, the name of our argument. And then at the end, we'll chain on exec to have this return a promise. And we'll make delete pin an async await function. And in order to make sure that this pin is only deleted if our user is authenticated, we'll wrap this with our authenticated higher order component or higher order function. And then since this mutation returns a pin, we're going to put it in the variable pin deleted and then return it from this function. And next we need to head to our mutations file within GraphQL and create a new mutation variable. So we'll export const delete pin mutation. So we'll begin with the mutation keyword, and we'll need to create a variable again for our pin ID of type ID and required. Then we'll provide the name of the mutation, delete pin, and we'll pass in the pin ID variable to the argument pin ID. And then we'll get back the entire pin object that was deleted, but in our case we really just need to return the ID. We'll be executing this mutation within our map component, so we'll head there and we'll go up to the top and we'll import delete pin mutation from /graphql/mutations. And we want to delete a pin and execute the mutation whenever our delete button is clicked. And that's down in our pop-up dialog. So if the current user is the auth user, or rather the current user is the one who created the selected pin, we'll add an onClick to this button, and we'll write an inline arrow function where in the return we'll execute handle delete pin and pass through the pop-up object, the pop-up data or the pin data that we're storing in state. So let's create handle delete pin above our return. And this will accept that pin object. And before we execute this mutation, we need to provide in our variables object the one variable of pin ID. That's going to come from pin._id. And then we can await client.request, pass in the delete pin mutation variable, and then the variables object as the second argument. We'll get back from this request our data object, and we can destructure from it delete pin, and then we'll dispatch a new action with type delete pin, and the payload will be delete pin. And since we're deleting a pin because of the displayed button in the pop-up, After this is executed, our pin will be gone and we should not display a pop-up for it. So once this is resolved, we will execute set popup and pass in null, its initial value. And then finally, let's head to our reducer. We'll add a new case delete pin, where we're going to put the payload in a new variable that we'll declare as deleted pin. We're going to filter through the pins array just like we did for create pin. So we'll say state.pins.filter, where for each pin we want to make sure that the pin's ID is not equal to the deleted pin's ID. So we'll call the return value from this filtered pins. So within the returned object, we'll spread in state. Pins will now be filtered pins, and the current pin, which is the one that we're deleting, since the pop-up is being shown for it, the current pin will be set to null. So let's save all of these files, and we'll test this out in the browser. And it looks like I made an error in the map component. We need to make sure that handle delete pin is an async function to use await. So now if we select a pin that the current user's created and then hit the delete button, it should immediately be removed. I'll check my console for any errors. So it looks like we're good, and if we refresh, that pin was in fact deleted.